Hi, my chat today was with a really interesting person, Anneli Blundell. Anneli was voted as Y Magazine's top 10 women to watch in 2019, and you can see why. She has this incredible passion for decoding people and understanding the dynamics that really drive performance. We had an amazing chat around leadership, around diversity, around understanding our biases. She's really a professional people whisperer. She works with lots of large organizations, senior leaders, and developing some really powerful things. She's also the author and co-author of a number of different books. She's got a book coming out next year called the Gender Penalty, which sounds like a really interesting topic. Anneli's worked with Mercedes-Benz, EY, Telstra, NAB, the Victorian Police, and she writes articles for many publications across Australia. She's a really interesting person to chat with, and I hope you really enjoy this conversation with Anneli Blundell. Hi, Anneli, welcome. How are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Daniel. How are you?
I'm really good. I'm really excited to chat to you today because you're an expert in some of my favorite topics around how to have difficult conversations around gender in the workplace, around these challenges that we're faced with that really slow us down and we seem to struggle to have conversations about. Can you just tell us a little bit more about how you got into this space?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was working in a bank. Don't hold that against me. It was many, many moons ago. So I started my own business about 13 years ago now. And it was really around helping people have one-on-one conversations more effectively. So I started in the executive coaching space, helping leaders build their influence, engagement, and ultimately their impact with the people around them. So my work is predominantly in two main areas when it comes to the one-on-one coaching and mentoring support I do. And that is, one aspect is around helping people who are technically brilliant become a little more people savvy, right? And the other aspect is people who are very people savvy, perhaps too nice, too accommodating, too pleasing, be a little bit more authoritative and a little bit firmer. So I like to joke that I help people become a bit softer and a bit stronger. For me, when we're interacting with humans, we know that one of the first decisions at an unconscious level we're making about the people in front of us comes from those two dimensions. How much do we like them? How warm are they? How nice are you? And do we think you're competent? Do we think you're strong or you're able to do things? And so being able to understand the impact you're making around your strength and your warmth and how that impacts the way people will relate to you, buy you, be influenced by you is really critical. So that's where I spend a lot of my time.
So what do you, I used to work for a bank as well, so we're in the same pot of evil. What do you think, what are some of the main challenges you see? So you're working with a lot of different leaders, and I get that there's these two sides, and I want to explore both if we can. Let's start with the people who are maybe too nice, and they might be in the minority in places like banks sometimes, but maybe not. What are some of the challenges they come up against in that space?
Mostly when people identify as being too nice or too accommodating or they don't want to rock the boat, what's happening is they are valuing the relationship higher than they're valuing the results. And so they find it really difficult to have hard conversations, to pass on difficult messages, possibly to give some critical or corrective feedback, because in their mind, the danger is that they're going to break that relationship. And they don't want to upset the other person. They don't want to jeopardize the strength of that relationship. So they tend to hold back to keep everything nice and pleasant, to keep the relationship sound and strong, But of course, the irony is what they don't realize is if you can never say no, or if you can never give critical feedback, then, the power of your yes means nothing, because we can't tell, do you really mean it? Are you really happy to do that extra assignment? We can't tell when the resentment's going to build up, because you're not known as someone who's prepared to hold boundaries or say no or give the hard feedback that's required. And the interesting thing about difficult feedback or hard conversations is there's research to suggest that we want the hard messages as much as the people don't want to deliver the hard messages,
I
which is
totally
the
get
great
it.
irony, right?
Yeah, I work with some of my clients. We do some work on feedback, and what's always interesting is when you ask people if they like receiving it, everyone's hand goes up. When you ask
Yes.
people if they like giving it, very few hands go up,
Yeah.
which is sort of counterintuitive, isn't it? It should be harder to receive feedback, particularly if it's critical or corrective, or it can be taken as a criticism of past behaviour, for example. It should
Mm-hmm.
be the other way around. So, what do you think drives that? Is it these social norms? Is it wanting to be liked? Is it lack of confidence? Something in between all of those?
Oh, I think this is something you know a little bit about, Daniel. Yes, it's all of those things. Absolutely. You're right on the money, of course. So there's an element of humans being social beings. So we know that we're tribal beings. That was how we survived and thrived back in the day. Of
Mm.
course, now we work and live very differently, but our reptilian brain hasn't caught up with that. So we still identify as humans as wanting to belong to the tribe. And interestingly, what we know is that the brain, the part of the brain that lights up when you're in physical pain, so you've been punched in the stomach, your brain lights up in a certain part of the brain to indicate pain. When
Yes.
we've received social pain, rejection, a bad comment, or something we don't like to hear, the same part of the brain lights up. So social pain feels to us the same as physical pain. So there is this mechanism where we're very attuned. We will tune into a threat 5 times faster than we will a reward, which is why when your boss says, have you got a minute? I'd love to chat with you in my office. What's the first thing you think of? It's like,
Sarah, what
what
did
have
I
I
do
done?
wrong? What did I do
Exactly. What
wrong?
did I do wrong? What have I done? Am I going to be fired? Oh my goodness. And they're probably in there to give you a raise or a bonus or a reward.
Yeah.
But your brain is instantly scanning for what's gone wrong. And that's just sort of survival mechanism. So when it comes to why we don't want to have these conversations, we are wired to be social. We're wired to build and invest in relationships that support us and nurture us and protect us. And so our brain feels like when we are jeopardizing that with a hard conversation, we're potentially going to be excluded from the group, and there goes the social pain aspect. And so that becomes dangerous
Yeah.
in our mind.
Cool. Let me keep building on this, because I'm interested in how the dynamics start to play out when you've got a room that has people who don't like giving feedback. They're considered to be relationship over results, soft, whatever phrasing that we sort of give this group of people. And we're going to stereotype, which is horrible, but let's just go with it. Then there's a group of people on the other side who are results over relationships, kill grandmother to get a raise, whatever it takes. And again, these often coexist in organizations. Talk to me about what's happening when these two start to mix together. It's easier to sort of look at the long term, the short term. Okay, this is what will happen in a specific situation. But what happens to the overall culture when these two start to mix? Do they balance each other out, or is it like pushing the same magnets together? What are we looking at here?
It would be nice if it balanced each other out. Like that would be really convenient, I think, for everybody, because when I talk about hard conversations, I often talk with people about this idea of the will or the skill, right? So most people are low on the will. Oh, I don't really want to, I'd rather not. And therefore they're often low on the skill because they haven't had enough practice to do it elegantly.
Sure.
Some people are high on the will. No problem. I'm ready to go in there and tell you what I think, but I don't take care with it. So my skill is also quite, a little bit low. It takes actual work to be high in the will and the skill, to get over yourself, to know that it's actually serving them, to give them the feedback, plus to do it elegantly. So when it comes to those two areas, we've got a bunch of people who hold back and won't give feedback. And so the people they lead, it's often quite detrimental to the cultures that they lead or in charge of, because if people aren't holding others to account, they're not giving feedback about standards not being upheld, they're not pulling people up on, low productivity or whatever the case is. Basically, they are setting the standard and the precedent as to what's okay and what's acceptable within the rest of the team and the culture. So why would I come in early and work hard when so-and-so comes in at 10 and leaves at 4 and you never say anything?
Yeah.
So that's one thing. It sets a precedent for what's approved and okay. Then on the other hand, if you've got someone who's able to jump in and is happy to have those conversations, if not inelegantly, if that's even a word, then what we have is basically just someone who gives constant, I guess, critical feedback and is not taking care of the person. And the issue here is that we want to know that you care about me before I will listen to the message that you have for me. So if I've decided all you ever do is criticize, then I'm not really interested in the feedback that you have for me, even if it's going to be valuable and correct.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's a really important point that, that I love that will and skill and bringing both of them up, because, it's 100% right. We've all been in both of those problematic areas where someone has plenty of desire to give you feedback and they deliver it, they do the old shit sandwich. You're really good at this, but here's the real thing I'm talking about, and then I'm going to say something else nice. And we know that our brain overly prioritizes negative because negative in the past would lead to threat, and threat would be potentially fatal, whereas something good might just be nice for a moment. Okay, so I want to think about this more, because one option is, let's just get everyone who's the same. Let's just get all the people who, they might give bad feedback, but at least they're giving it directly and it's rough. Just get all those types of people together, and then we'll let all the soft people, they'll build their own organization and separate and just run in our own little ways. It's very counter to what we know is important now around diversity.
Yes.
Talk to me about how this stuff starts to play out and what you see happening around diversity in organizations.
Okay, so that scenario you painted, in my mind, disaster. So, of course, if we look at it from the space of diversity, obviously that's a disaster. But if we look at it from a place of human evolution and human growth and the idea of consciousness and the idea of, the human desire to evolve and to get better and continually adapt. And if you look at the basis of Jungian psychology, which is the idea of integrating opposites, right? So actually what we have, which is why I'm so interested in the idea of strength and warmth, right? The technical leaders who need more warmth and the warm leaders who need more strength, is because what we're actually doing is trying to move people more to the middle, to integrate their opposites, to build behavioral flexibility. That's the outcome of the day. So in my world, we would have people trying to come to the middle. And one of the things that I hear a lot, and this is a pushback when people come to coaching or they come to programs, for example, if we've got people who are, technically strong leaders and they've been sent to coaching or whatever the case is. And first of all, I say, I don't do prisoners. So if you don't want to be here, you don't have to be here. That's all good.
Yeah.
But the idea is, this is who I am and you're not going to change me. Or I'm an introvert, I'm quiet, I'm really nice, I'm quite shy. I don't feel comfortable being so bold as to give my boss feedback or whatever the case is. And so I don't want to have to become a raging, gregarious extrovert. Don't make me someone I'm not. And the idea here is, you never have to change into somebody who you are not. But if you want to grow and develop and succeed in your career, you always have to continually change and evolve and grow.
Yes.
So the idea is not to make you from an introvert to an extrovert. The idea is to give you a range of flexibility so that you have the capacity to switch your language and communication style to the different people that you're talking with to be more effective. Why wouldn't you be? That's the whole name of the game in the people game.
Yeah, and a really simple, I guess, way of thinking about it. It's a bit like I've got a friend. She's from Belgium, and so she can speak obviously Flemish. She can speak Dutch. She can speak French. She can speak Italian. She can speak Spanish, German, and that gives her an incredible ability to. It doesn't change her nationality. It doesn't stop her being who she is and having her style and accent in all of those languages. I'm sure. She also speaks English very well, probably better than me. But that ability to flex is sort of what you're talking about, isn't it? Like, I am who I am, but I also, if I really want to work effectively in highly diverse organizations, highly diverse situations, which is critical in our modern globalized world, then I need to be able to meet people where they are or identify and change who I am and adapt.
That is so funny that you should use that exact example, because that's the metaphor I use in my Women in Leadership Masterclass. Right. So I literally say, you don't have to give up your passport. So you're Australian, you're going to live in France. You don't have to give up your nationality. You can still be Australian, but you need to learn French. Particularly in France, if you're going to ask for a baguette and a hot chocolate for brekkie, you ain't getting one unless you can learn the language. Yeah. So, and the idea here is, so I relate that back to women and men in the workplace. So I have women in my program say, I don't want to have to become a man. Fair call. That's not the point of the program, obviously. I don't want to have to, again, be loud and boisterous or feel like I have to cut in and talk over people because that's the culture of the day. And I say, I get it. Yeah. And you don't have to do those things, but you just can't keep doing what you're currently doing if what you're currently doing isn't working. Obviously. So the idea is, how do you honor and maintain who you are with authenticity, but use different, and maybe the strategies are different for you. Maybe it's not speaking up out loud to try and get a word in a meeting you're not comfortable with. Maybe it's a strategy of pre-meeting, post-meeting lobbying so that someone else has your idea, so that at least you get that message across in the meeting and you just, sort of stamp it rather than having to present it. If that works, fine. Yeah,
and I think that's really clever, because the worst thing I've seen happen is people try and change lots of things straight away. So they're always quiet. I'm never going to step up. That's just who I've been for a year and a half, 2 years in this organization. They go to a one-day course, they come back, and suddenly they're, Tony Robbins style, jumping on seats and high-fiving. And you're like, well, there's two challenges there. One, it's very hard for you to authentically change, restructure your brain in a day, but also the organization you're in has a certain culture and style that you fit into.
Yes.
And you suddenly become this weird, multi-dimensional strangeness in amongst all of that.
Yes. And interestingly, again, seriously, if you weren't a woman, I'd be like, how are you? These are all topics that I cover in this program. So have you been in the room? And
I haven't snuck into your course because I was with a skirt on. No.
But one of the things I talk about is this idea of backlash. So women face a particularly tricky challenge where they are asked to change their communication style and mannerism because they're not visible enough or they're not authoritative enough, and there's validity in some of those strategies. Yeah. But then at the same time, when they do that, they get the social backlash of, oh, well, now we're seeing you as a woman trying to be a man, and so now you're bossy, bitchy, aggressive, all that jazz.
Yeah.
So there's a fine line that women often have to balance when they're doing this work. So, for example, if we've got someone who needs to say no or needs to push back, this is one of the things women have to do a lot, because they get lumped with a lot of the non-promotable work. So they either volunteer more often to do those thankless tasks, the meetings and organising days out and Christmas parties and all that jazz. Yep. And they're more likely to be volunteered by both men and women. So women need to say no more often. Thank you for the opportunity to organise a Christmas party. I'll do it this year. Next year, John can do it, right? That's the strategy.
Yeah.
But when women are first learning, as an example, when or anyone is first learning to push back and hold boundaries, if you come straight out and say, no, I'm not doing it anymore and I had to do it in the first place, I'm never doing it again, people will think you're having a meltdown and they won't take you seriously, of course. And that is really just you in what I call the behavior change arc. You're just flipping from one to the other. It's unstable.
Yes.
And you haven't quite built the legs to hold that there. So what we want to do is, that will happen. You'll flip a little bit, but we want you to come back to the center and be a little bit more rounded. So the idea is to go slowly, but you have to be aware that when you are making changes in the way you lead or the way you communicate, particularly if you're not used to doing this. So for example, if I'm working with technical leaders and I'm helping them move from a controlling and commanding style to a coaching style, and all of a sudden they're asking their direct reports, well, what do you think we should do? And their direct reports go, why are you asking me that? Like, what's going on with you? This is a trap. I can tell, because you've never done that before, right?
Trap.
And so
So tricky.
they get all freaked out by this change in your behavior. And because it's new, they start wondering what's going on. Yeah. So I always recommend that you start slowly, and you have to be prepared for the backlash. You have to be prepared for the responses. So if you're, for example, saying no, the thing most people have to get over when they're giving that tough message is the look they receive. It's the look that they're worried about. It's that disappointed, frowny face of the person you're now going to let down because you are not being convenient to them. And this is what I say. Their disappointment is not a disappointment in you. It's a disappointment in the fact that you are no longer convenient to them to continue to do the thing that they probably should be doing or someone else could be doing and you don't need to be doing.
Yeah. I think it's a really cool point. You know, the other thing I'd add on to that is you need to give them time to change, because they have a whole bunch of expectations and beliefs and ways in which we've always done things around here. When you change, they have to change as well to sort of, otherwise you get this cognitive dissonance, don't you, between, you know, well, that's what has always happened. You always organise the parties. What do you mean you're not going to organise the parties? I don't even know what to do now. Who the hell's going to organise the parties? You seem to enjoy it last time. You know, all of these things are going on in their head. So you have to help them through that change.
Yes, which is why I advocate for the yes and next time. So it's not no, it's not now. It's a sort of staggered no. You don't want to be too forceful with the first time no. You want to retrain them. So yes, absolutely. I will. I'm a team player, happy to do that. And, in service of the group and to make sure everyone gets an opportunity to do that, so it doesn't just fall on the one person all the time, I suggest that we start up a roster and I'll kickstart.
Yeah.
Done.
Yeah, absolutely. And that takes a bit of leadership. It takes conversations, takes honesty. The thing I find really interesting at the moment around, who's going to organise the party might not be a super tough conversation. It might feel like it at the time, absolutely. But, when we're talking about things like gender diversity, we're talking about a whole range of topics, there's this tendency for people to not want to have the conversation, or when they do start to have the conversation, people in the conversation can get triggered in ways that, it becomes this volcanic eruption or shutting down, this sort of meltdown situation based on some sort of emotional charge in the topic. These are the sorts of things that you're seeing happening as well, this sort of social or this venting and outrage that happens.
Absolutely. One of the really tricky parts of being in a difficult conversation is that as humans, we're really unskilled. We're really unskilled at it, to be honest. We don't, how often do you race in to have that hard conversation because you love a bit of practice? You don't. Most of us don't. Yeah. And so we bumble our way through. We're not really great at holding the space and giving the space and sitting. I call it sitting in the shoe, because we're not comfortable sitting in the discomfort.
Yeah.
And so there's a couple of things that happen. So if I give you some feedback, or I I want to have a politically charged conversation. I want to talk about who's in, who you voted for or what your religion is, and it's not even a difficult conversation, but it's a hard conversation to be in. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's a couple of components that magnify that difficulty. One is how I feel about you affects how I feel about the message.
Mm-hmm.
So if I just meet you at a dinner party and I smile at you and say, "Hi, my name's Anneli, nice to meet you," and you go, I automatically go, a-hole. I'm not very happy with that response. This is not someone I like. And if I downgrade your likability, I also subsequently and unconsciously downgrade your competence. So from that point on, anything you have to say, I don't really buy into. No matter how correct, you could be a professor of what, I don't really care. I don't rate you because I don't like you. That's one thing.
Yeah.
The second thing is, if you say something that goes against my fundamental beliefs about something, and you present evidence, facts that go against my belief, there's something that kicks in called the backfire effect, which means even when presented with opposite information, opposite truths to my belief, when I get that information presented to me, I believe my incorrect belief even more.
Yes.
So what people think is that they get into these debates and conversations, and in my mind, I think, well, if I just tell you the truth, and if I give you some facts and I give you some research, and I think you're mad, I talk about vaccinations and I talk about all these politically charged things, and I go, I'll just give you more and more data, more truth and irrefutable facts, you'll get on board. And actually what I'm doing is solidifying your correct or incorrect belief in the process.
Yeah.
Right? That's madness.
It is, and it's something we need to know about our brain. Like it's a default mode that our brain has. We build these fundamental belief systems, and they become the platform by which we tell our story, our narrative in the world. And so, as soon as someone pierces that or tries to pierce that, it's much easier for us to say, "I'm not going to, reshape this whole base of my cake. We're dealing with the icing here. I'm not going to remake the whole cake here just so you can put some extra things in the icing." There's this fundamental view that we need to hold our belief systems, yet that is almost impossible. I mean, there's only two options there. One is maybe there's more than two options. There's three or four, but one of the options is let me avoid anyone who doesn't share my beliefs. Let me just not. I'm just going to ignore all of them. I'm just going to hang out in my village, and this is almost like a cult behavior, right? Find the people who believe what I believe, ignore the rest. That doesn't work in a modern globalized world, particularly in business. So we can say that's, I see that tactic. I don't think it's very effective. The second is I can just change my fundamental beliefs constantly. I can have no fixed address for what I believe in. I'm just constantly flitting between things. I think that's equally dangerous, challenging. And I think the response of the third response I can think of is being someone who's militantly trying to change everyone else. So my job is to go out, and if I find someone who's got a belief different to mine, my job is to convince them that they're wrong. And you see this a lot with people like the flat earthers, right? They're not a group of people who believe what they believe and they're just sort of tucked away. And, if it comes up randomly in conversation, then we'll have a chat about it. It's like they're out there. I need everyone else to change what they believe in spite of facts. And I really like that call out on facts. What's the right way, you think, to start to, because we will always be faced with a view that's fundamentally different to ours. What's the right way to take the information in, ruminate on it, and then respond? What do you think?
Well, there's a couple of things in this space. Firstly, something to be aware of is this idea that in terms of neuroscience, we can become addicted to being right. So we need to understand for ourselves that we may be part of the problem. So you say, we're pushing our opinions on others. I might be talking to someone with what I think is a fundamentally incorrect view. And so I'm presenting all this research and these facts. And so I'm thinking, with all my good facts, they should change their opinion because I know I'm right. And the brain gets a dopamine hit every time I'm right. So it's like, I want this argument because I want them to see my perspective because that confirms I'm right. And my little brain goes, I win. So if you're stuck in that vein, you're never going to get anywhere in that conversation. So you have to be able to unhook from your brain's tendency to go, being addicted to being right, and just being able to be curious. So the idea here is the more curious you can be, the more you can let go of one perspective, and the more you can try and understand what that person's view, where the view comes from, what created that perception or that view. The more you can demonstrate to the person that you're listening to their view and you're willing to hear their view, the more likely it is that they are willing to listen to yours. But what happens is we get into this fundamental push-pull and nobody's creating the space where people can actually feel heard. It's the classic customer service strategy, right? The angry customer. You never say to an angry customer, well, that's what the policy says, and so this is what we're going to do. You never do that, right? It just makes them angry. Yeah. You say, oh my goodness, that sounds terrible. I'm so sorry. Wow, I can't believe we overlooked that. You must have felt so distraught. I'm so sorry you went through that. Yes, that's right. Vent. You know me. Thank you. And then all the wind goes out of their sails. And they feel heard, and then they're willing to hear.
Yes. Yeah, that's it's interesting because in my model around empathy, and the thing that I focus on a lot is empathy is all about how do I understand others?
Yes.
How do I understand them? And that starts with being what I call consciously curious, knowing that I believe certain things, knowing that they may or may not be true, but I'm going to park them in order to have a really open exploration with the person. That's not always easy. So how do you start that journey of curiosity in your view?
So there's some really interesting techniques that you can try. So the classic one is, sort of step into the other person's shoes. But there's a strategy you can use to do that. It can be a bit of a stretch, particularly if you feel very firm. We're imagining people who are quite polarized and they're quite firm in their view. But if you can write a letter as if you are the other person. So this is not just stepping into their shoes. It's almost like writing to convince somebody else to come on board the opposite opinion.
Yes.
So if I'm a flat earther and you're a round earther and I'm trying to change your mind and you're trying to change mine, I would try and convince you that the earth was
round.
Thank you. Yes.
Yes.
That's right.
I know what you mean. You've got to prove the opposite. Trying to prove the opposite
view.
Yeah.
Thank you for that summation. Yes, you've got to prove the opposite view, because when you do that, it forces your brain to move out of those highway neural pathways that your brain knows automatically and are so deeply entrenched, and start building new ones, new possibilities, and go, well, maybe that is true. And I wonder what you really have to get into the mind and heart and soul of the other perspective for you to even put pen to paper around that. And that's all we're asking for.
It's hard in a bunch of ways, I think, for people to do that. One of the ways that I'm starting to, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this recently, is we get trapped in little echo chambers. And this has always happened. So in high school, if you were one of the surfy kids, you'd hang out with other surfy kids, you'd all like certain types of music, you'd start to reinforce that, yes, we're doing the right things, other people are doing the wrong things. We do it as kids, we do it in tribal situations. I think the thing that's really amplified today is we've got not only the internet, which provides endless sources of information, but we have algorithms that direct you to the information that you're looking for, not the alternative. And
I know.
This is something I'm interested in your thoughts on this, because the concern I have is we've never had more access to all information, but we've also it's sort of like we suddenly all got access to the full library of knowledge. Wow.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we now get directed into certain rooms, and we're only allowed to check out those books. We're not allowed
Yeah.
to check out the whole library.
Yeah, and I'm with you. I think this is really, really dangerous because the way the World Wide Web works is that it doesn't just spew you random information. It returns stuff based on what you're already putting in.
That's right.
So, the world is a dark place. How do I make a bomb? How do I be evil? If that's your life, that is what you will get, and that is what you will think the web is about.
Yeah.
And vice versa. And so it's a concern because it feeds into confirmation bias, right? So if you think this is the world, then of course you're going to search for it, and then of course you're going to find it. And then we've got those pesky algorithms in the background. So any of your social networks or feeds are going to start feeding you ads and pages and articles that further confirm. And because we're not discerning consumers of this social system anymore, we're not critical thinkers. We just go, oh, wow, that's exactly what I was thinking. See, there it is in the newspaper.
And you get that dopamine hit you mentioned earlier. I am right. See, I am right. Yeah. And then, you get these Facebook arguments of here's all the facts on why I'm exactly right. And then someone else has got a whole bunch of, they're not really facts, they're references. Here's a whole bunch of web pages that say that I'm right. And here's a whole bunch of web pages that say that I'm right. And two things start to happen there. One is, well, I'm never going to read those web pages that say I'm not right, am I? Why would I read them?
That's right.
They must be wrong because I'm right.
Right. Backfire effect. That just proves to me that I am even more correct.
That's right. And then I make judgments, and this is something I'm interested in chatting some more about. I make judgments about you as a person rather than your statements and ideas.
Yes.
Tell me how these things play out.
Yeah, so we move into the realm of the fundamental attribution error, where I make your behaviors become your character or your identity. So the example I often use is road rage. So, we're in traffic and someone cuts you off in traffic and you get all angry, you're on the horns, you might flip them the bird or whatever it is. You have a road rage response because this person's a stranger to you and you think that person's an idiot. They are an idiot, not they drove irresponsibly. They are an idiot. You make the behavior their character. But then if you happen to look at the driver and it's your mum or your loved one or, your best friend, and you go, oh, no worries, Jane. And in your mind you think, oh, it happens to the best of us. She's having a bad day. We make it about the behavior, not about the character, because we know the character of that person.
Yes.
So where this becomes really dangerous is when we are not skilled at or aware of this potential. Any idea that does not support our own idea make other people bad people. And of course I can't listen to you and pay attention, because if going back to the idea that the decision we make about the messenger affects how we respond to the message and the validity of the message, means that if I've decided you're a bad person or you're uneducated or whatever it is, then I won't pay attention. I'm not open now to the conversation. I can't sit in a difficult conversation with you because I don't like you. Even Harvard did a really interesting study around this idea of who would you rather work with in the workplace? Would you rather work with people who are really brilliant but not particularly likable? Or would you rather work with people who were really likable but not particularly brilliant? And so, obviously you don't want to work with someone who's really not really smart and not really nice. That's an obvious one. And everyone wants to work with someone who's really clever and really nice. That's also an obvious one. But what about these two options in between? So most people report that they would like to work with the person who's competent but just not really nice. Because in your mind you think, well, at least they'll get the job done. I know I can rely on them. This is what we tell ourselves.
Yeah.
But in reality, what we choose is we want to work with, they call it the lovable fool. We want to work with the person who's actually nice and easy to get along with and pleasant to be around. And we forgive them for their inability to get shit done the way we want them to. We forgive them because actually as humans, we would rather be with people that we like know, trust, can build a relationship with.
Yeah.
That's a really big deal when it comes to being in conversation with people you don't like and having to engage with their ideas because you've already made a decision about them and their ideas based on your decision of them.
Yeah, and it's so easy to when we have really strong convictions or beliefs. I know for a lot of people, the idea of religion or those types of same-sex marriage, equality, whenever they hear any signal that you might be challenging their belief in this area, it can be an immediate. It immediately changes the way they hear everything else.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
so I've seen this many times. I'll often walk into a group of CEOs who sort of mid-tier organizations, and it's not atypical for them to be all men, all between the ages of 55 and 70. The pre-conversation to the meeting is about who's got the biggest boat, and those types of, I'm being again very stereotypical, and I walk in and they think, oh, here's the guy who's going to talk to us about empathy.
Yeah.
And what I find interesting is I've often seen some of those people, and maybe it's an age thing, be more comfortable to have a change of opinion than I have for some people who straight out of uni and they've got very strong views on any topic. They're far less curious and less interested. This is my observation. I think people are becoming more wedded to specific views and less likely to spend any time listening to an opposing view. What would you think of?
Yeah, and I wonder if that's because we have so much exposure to so many fundamental ideas, more than ever before, as you say. Yeah. I mean, it used to be not quite, but you grew up in your village, you got work in your village, you might have moved to the big city, you work for a big company, but you're still in your little sort of echo chamber, you're still in your little bubble, really. But now we've got access to everything, anything, like you talk about. And I wonder how much of it is just a protection mechanism where, I've sort of steeled myself against ridiculous ideas because they're so ridiculous that I just go, well, that's ridiculous. And I start closing down and I stop listening or becoming curious or engaging with the crazies because I'm like, there's just too many of them. And I'd rather just stay in my little bubble.
Yeah. And that sort of, I'm interested in your advice you give to leaders. So if I was a senior leader and I've worked in organizations for a long time, and the way I got to where I am is through having a very strong, it's all about results, relationships, we'll get to there later, don't worry about that, deliver. I'm now faced with building and managing a team of people who are from a totally different world. They're from a world that says, I care about a whole range of topics that are outside of work, but those things are fundamentally important to me. I won't enter debates on any of these topics. This is just how it is. And I expect you as a leader to be sympathetic and understanding of everything that I believe in. How do you help a strong, I can imagine these two things clash and you hear about them happening that way. Or worse, one side just pretends to fit in with the other, and you get horrible inauthenticity. But as a senior leader, the way I often would tell people, your job is to inspire curiosity in others. How do you have conversations that open up curiosity? But you might have some other tactics or techniques in this space.
So I always find this an interesting one. So as people go up the food chain, and become more and more senior, they become more and more, they get to rely more and more on their positional power. So I talk a lot about power and the way we respond and relate and use power. So two forms of power: your internal power, so this is my own personal empowerment and sense of self, and my positional power, my external power, right? The position you give me. So sure, as I get more senior, I've got a lot of external power, a lot of positional power, of course, because I'm your boss. I could hire you, fire you. Yep. Yeah. But if I'm not equally using my personal power or being aware of the strength I have inherent in myself as I take up that role, then I'm likely to misuse my power. So when people are moving from, command control, or they're needing to build those inclusive cultures, and they want to understand what it's like for people who aren't at the top, or maybe those are on the outer edge, so the marginalized groups, or whatever the case is, really need to think about your power footprint. So power is such a fascinating topic. Most people aren't aware of the shenanigans that go on with this whole power dynamic. So what we know about power is the more you have it, the more it acts in your brain like you're drunk. Like literally, you get drunk, you literally get drunk with power. And it means you have an inability to see the reality of those who are in positions with less power.
Yeah.
So you have less ability to empathize. I know that's your bag. So you have less ability to empathize. You can't see what those people can see. You're out of touch with the reality of your market, essentially, if you're building, trying to reach these people. So in terms of connection and influence and engagement strategies, one of the best things you can do is recognize that your power will alienate you from the reality of the marginalized groups, and you need to reduce the power. Yeah. So that might be, you might have heard executives in the front line in the ivory tower, quote unquote, be sent to the front line and spend the day in the branch, right? Because I got to get real and find out what people are really doing on the front end. And so this idea of talking to people, asking them questions, finding out what's going on for them. One of my favorite shows, I didn't get to see very often, but whenever I saw it, I just loved it. It was this idea of Undercover Boss.
Yeah, Undercover Boss.
Right?
Yeah, I've seen that a bunch
of
times.
So illuminating. Yeah. Undercover Boss is so fascinating because it's that whole idea of you don't have your positional power anymore. I don't have to listen to you. The skill set required on the front end. I remember seeing someone who was running one of the fast food chains in America. It wasn't a McDonald's, but it was like a burger joint. And he came and he spent the day flipping burgers, basically. And he was so woeful. This poor guy was so terrible at it because he was, I think he might have been the CFO or something. He was a reflective thinker. He spent lots of time in his mind moving things around and strategically, thinking things. But the day-to-day life in that burger joint was flip, move, boom, 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 boom. And this poor woman who was training this lackluster trainee for the day was tearing her hair out. She's like to the camera, this guy's never going to make it in this company. He just can't get, he just won't move. Like he's like dumb. Like he just doesn't get it because the skill set was so different. And for him, that was such a massive flip to go, wow, I had no appreciation for what's required in a role that I am so far removed from. This has been such an illuminating exercise for me.
Yeah, and look, that is definitely a lot of the space that I love to help leaders move into, that place of empathy. What's really going on? Why are they doing what they're doing? It's so easy for us to conveniently come up with a story that they're just lazy, they're wasting their time, they're not doing this, they're not doing that, and the reality is that one of the things I often say to people is, how would they describe why they did the behavior? So if they've done something, how would they describe why they did it? Because they probably wouldn't. If your answer is, it's because they're lazy, they'd go, I didn't do that because I was lazy. It's often, I didn't do that because I got 6 other things I need to do, or I didn't do that because I actually didn't think it was the right thing to do at the moment. So it's a really interesting point.
In my last book, Developing Direct Reports, which is a leader's guide for helping leaders develop leadership in others, essentially, one of the things we looked at there was we looked at the 12 globally recognized leadership derailers, things like being a bull at a gate, or poker face, or being too task focused, or being a micromanager. And so what we did was we looked at what these behaviors were, and we did a bit of a snapshot on each page at the start of each chapter around what the boss would say about that behavior, what the peers are saying, kind of like what the 360 feedback would look like, what their direct reports are saying, they're suffocating us, we can't get our ideas through, they're a bottleneck, all that kind of stuff. And then underneath that, we have the person's intention. And the whole point of each chapter is to say, you've got a micromanager on your hands. They're suffocating the bejesus out of their team members. But chances are they don't realize the impact and they are shooting for quality or something else.
Yeah.
So you think they're being micromanagers. They think they're being amazing quality managers and they don't know the impact. So the advice always is, and the whole chapter's around what could be going on under the surface that's driving this person's behavior so that you can let go of this judgment around, oh, they're just squashing everybody, and actually have a dialogue that says, hey, I'm noticing these impacts. I'm just curious to know what's important to you about getting this result, and, being so hands-on with the team, which is very supportive.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that. And then they'll say, I'm really going for quality. It's really important that we assure the outcome. Oh, that's fabulous. What's another way we could do that? And how could we do that with less conversations and perhaps not 7 meetings a day and whatever else the coaching. And then, of course, we've got coaching tips on how to help them sort of, step away from that. And the whole idea is, how do you separate behavior from intention?
Yep. I think that's really wise. It's so funny that our whole lives is just a story we tell ourselves in our head, and we sort of forget that other people also have a story they're telling themselves, and that they're not the same. Our stories don't always sync up.
Yeah. And actually, that's one of the most common coaching frames that I use when I'm having conversations. And in fact, particularly sort of bringing it full circle with hard conversations. So often, I'm in the meeting with my client and this person did this and they said that and that clearly means this. I'm like, well, does it clearly mean that? So let's just brainstorm. What else could that mean?
Yes.
What else could they have been thinking? What else do you think's going on for this person?
Yeah.
So when they can step away from their decision around what that person's intention was or what that behavior meant, and therefore the story they're telling themselves is, when they can step away from that, that's when they can have a real conversation. We know that when we make decisions about people's behaviors, we get caught in this loop. Dr. Maria Nemeth put together a really beautiful model around the conclusion model. So 4-box model, very aptly named 4-box model. It's pretty simple, and it just says sort of event. So something happens, you frown at me in a meeting. Conclusion, I decide you don't like that idea. My behavior, so I start shutting down, I stop contributing. Your behavior to me, you start wondering why I'm shutting down, so you start shutting down. And all of a sudden, we're not talking to each other and we don't know why. And your frown in the meeting was not because you didn't like my idea, it's because you're hungry, or you rolled your ankle on the weekend and it's hurting you. And so you frowned the moment I put my idea on the table.
Yes.
That's how we get into trouble.
Yeah, absolutely. I use a very similar model that it's basically think, feel, say, do. But it's, I say or do something that makes you think or feel something, which then makes you say or do something, which I see. And we get into these downward spirals. I had a manager who I very much liked, and he's a great guy, but he would take every paper that I wrote away with a red pen.
Yes.
And he would just about rewrite the whole paper in the margins with a red pen. On one draft, he changed a word around, and then the second draft, he changed it back. And, and I sort of think about it in this model saying, well, that's what he did. And then how did that make me think or feel? Well, pretty bad. I'm not doing a good job. And, he may as well do the paper. So my response to that, what did it make me say or do? Well, it made me work less hard on the next version. He's just going to rewrite it anyway, right? And then I give that paper to him and he goes, these papers are getting worse, they're not getting better. I've got to do more editing. And we start this sort of downward spiral, don't we?
Yeah. And in fact, that's a really good example. So, one of the things I do a lot of in my work is decoding behaviors, right? So I've spent a lot of years training around the world around how to decode people's behaviors at a deep unconscious level. And one of the patterns that we look for is one that you just described. So this is around people who are what we call away from focus. So they're focused on the problems. They're focused on the issues that can come up. So if you are a manager who is focused on the problems, that is one of the classic behaviors. If you're given something, your job is to look for the problems. So you don't look for what's right about it, you look for what's wrong about it, and you love to edit and correct. So bring out the red pen. It also means that if you're in a meeting, you're likely to tell everybody what's wrong with that wonderful idea someone put forward, or how it hasn't worked in the past, or how that's never going to work because, and you get branded as the negative Nelly. So without awareness of this sort of stuff, so I teach or I work with leaders so they know about this, and they know if that's them, the impact they're likely to have on their teams and the effect that will have, as per your description. And if you're a team member, I help them understand, what do you do with that sort of stuff? So I've often given the advice to people that says, okay, so your boss is motivated by finding errors and problems. Give them something to find. Never give them a final draft. Never give them something perfect. Do not spend your weekend on this thing. Give them a basic outline and let them go to town, because they're going to anyway, as you said. And that way it becomes a game and you're not upset by it, and they're loving it because they feel valued and like they're adding, they're contributing to your ideas, and you do less work.
Yeah.
Happy days.
Great advice. Anneli, it's been so good to chat to you. Now, you've got a book coming out next year, The Gender Penalty. Is that right?
I do. Yes, indeed. So
Give
the
us
gender
the
penalty.
30-second high level on that.
Yes. So this is the penalties that sideline women at work and the power plays to even the playing field. So it's really around helping people understand, or women in particular, the 5 major gender penalties that women face, which is mostly around great career advice that works for men but creates a backlash for women. So for example, be confident, be strong, don't be arrogant. Be visible, don't be boastful. Push back, but don't be a bitch. So it's, how do you navigate those really useful pieces of advice that are necessary, but you need to filter them through the gender lens so that you can also then navigate the backlash that comes with it. Yeah. And how do you make sure that you've got the power plays to make sure that you can remain you, stay authentic and in your personal power space, if you like, but still create enough flexibility so you can be visible, you can be heard, and you can create the career that you want.
Fantastic. Oh, it sounds like it's going to be a great read. I look forward to getting a copy. How can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more? I imagine you deliver some amazing value to leaders. So how can they get in touch?
Well, I'm on the socials, so you'll find me on LinkedIn and Facebook, and of course my website. So the easiest way is probably my website, which is just my name. So it's www.anneliblundell.com, ANNELI Blundell.com.
Fantastic. Well, it's been wonderful chatting to you. Thanks for your time, and hopefully we can do it again sometime. And I think there's a whole lot of crossover between what we do and a whole lot of value that we could add together.
Absolutely. Thanks so much, Daniel.
Awesome. Thank you.